right, well today we have on Mr. Alan Worrell, who works for the Carroll News. Sir, how are you?
I'm great. How are you guys?
I'm doing good. We've been reading the paper for years.
Yeah.
and years.
Thank you.
So we're very excited to have you on.
Yes, sir.
Well, I'm excited to be here. I appreciate you guys giving me an invitation.
Thank you for accepting and coming on. It means a lot to us.
I appreciate that.
Well, we always start off this way. Where did you grow up?
Right here.
Yeah.
Right here in Carroll County. Born and raised. I graduated from Carroll in 1993. I've lived here other than 4 years I was at Emory and Henry. That's where I went to college. Once I got out from Emory, once I graduated, I was hired at the Mount Airy News. I worked there from 99 until 2004. Lived in Mount Airy for, I think, 2 years. And other than that, I've been in Carroll, Hillsville my whole life. So,
Where did you go to elementary school?
Hillsville
Hillsville
Elementary School.
So it was all the way through. Were you very academic in high school?
Yeah, I was top 10% of my class. Talented and gifted. I was in the honor society, that sort of stuff. Yeah.
Was there a school newspaper when you were in school?
There was not.
It's not.
But there is an interesting story, sort of how I got on this path. I had an English teacher named Barbara Hallett.
Okay.
And that name's going to come around a couple times.
Okay.
I had her my senior year, and my senior year I was a member of the football team, and she always asked us to write journals. And I always liked putting the football games in my own words. Yeah. That was sort of what I did. That was sports was what I really enjoyed. It's what I like to write about. So I thought, well, we'll try this.
Yeah.
I was just messing around. I didn't think I was going to make a career out of it. It was just something to do for that class and whatever. But, you know, she told me my writing was good. Might be something to pursue. It was never really at the forefront of my mind. And I got to Emory and Henry. I was undecided major. In my freshman year there, I was asked to write a piece for the school newspaper, the White Topper. And I wrote one, they liked it. Next thing you know, I wrote two. I think by the end of the semester, I was the sports editor.
Quick progression.
Yes. So I did that all during college. I broadcast some basketball games on WEHC, which was our school radio station. It was 90.7 FM. It only went out to about a 10-mile radius, but we were still on air.
Yeah.
I still got to do what
That's
I
neat.
like to do. One thing about that, though, and you guys can probably already tell, I found out really quick I didn't have the voice to be a broadcaster, other than maybe NASCAR, because of the thick Southern drawl. But that's kind of how I ended up going down that path.
So you mentioned your English teacher. Were you a big reader in high school or as you were younger?
Yes, and I always read the newspaper.
Right.
My grandpa and grandma, which I spent a lot of my time with, was Otto and Mary Sumner. He always had a subscription to the Roanoke Times, and I read it religiously, and I read the sports section religiously. And that kind of, I guess, sort of put that bug in me.
Right.
You know?
Yeah. Gave you the idea.
Yeah.
Who was the president of the Roanoke Times during that time? Because we interviewed Walter Gaber, and he was president
From the late 90s.
I just wonder if he maybe would have been president when you were reading it.
Honestly, I don't know who the president would have been at the time. That would have been early 90s. One of my favorite writers was Randy King, who his beat was Virginia Tech, which I'm a big Virginia Tech fan.
Of course.
But he threw a lot of humor into his writing too, and I kind of tried to pattern my style a little bit after him growing up. But I don't know who the president was of the paper at that time. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I guess it doesn't really have much bearing on the actual writers themselves, because it's just production, whatever.
You mentioned that you were an undecided major. Did you have any idea what you wanted to do when you were in high school, your senior year?
No, I didn't have the foggiest idea. I didn't have a clue. I just knew I needed to go to college and get a degree. And I took basic courses.
Yeah.
Right.
And there's another point I want to get to in a second, though. I took my general courses my freshman year, just to sort of get a handle on. Well, you got to get those basic classes out of the way anyway. Back then, we didn't have the dual enrollment. I missed that,
Yeah.
So we had to go through all 4 years of college. I took those general courses. One of them was a mass comm class,
Okay.
and my what ended up being my advisor throughout my year I had in my freshman year. He ended up being a mentor to me. David Copeland was his name.
Okay.
And he actually, while I was at Emory, he was named the Virginia Professor of the Year. I mean, that's how good he was. He ended up leaving to go to Elon to do the same thing, which you think about. At that time, Emory and Henry was a D3 school.
Yeah.
Elon's a D1. So, I mean, that was a big...
Was he a good lecturer?
He was so good at captivating the class. He would keep your attention. He was humorous, but he was also serious. And that was the kind of teacher I learned best from.
Right.
Yeah.
Kind of captivate you and want to learn about you. You know, we all have those monotonous teachers sometimes, and those were hard for me.
Yeah.
He really captivated. He really pushed you. He was able to get the best out of you, and that's what he did for me. And like I said, it was once I started writing for the school paper, I just kind of got the bug. You know, I was like,
this is fun.
yeah. When I graduated, this is where it goes back to Miss Hallett. There was a 3 or 4 month period there where I had a hard time finding a job. I actually took a job as an insurance salesman. That was the first job I took. I lasted about 3 days. I went through the training. Guys, I'm not going to be doing this the rest of my life.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Well, about a month later, a job opening came at the Mount Airy News.
Right.
Put an application in. I get interviewed. The person who interviewed me is Michael Hallett. Well, Michael is Barbara Hallett's husband.
Oh, wow. Funny how that works.
Yeah.
The one who encouraged me to write, now her husband,
He was hiring you.
is the one interviewing me for a job, and we hit it off. I mean, we were just, it was like we had great chemistry. We liked the same things. He liked my writing, so he hired me. And I ended up doing sports there for about a year. We had a shake-up. Our editor left. Michael got promoted to managing editor.
Okay.
So he went from sports to totally news. And I got bumped up to sports editor. So that was a really quick transition.
Yeah.
Really quick.
Was there a steep learning curve for that adjustment?
Well, not really. It was learning the schools and learning the coaches. I mean, there at Mount Airy, there's 5 high schools in Surrey County. You got Mount Airy, North Surrey, Surrey Central, East Surrey. And even though we really didn't cover it from Mount Airy, you still had Elkin. Elkin had their own newspaper. Okay. So
Was Millennium around at the time, charter? Or did
I think they were. That was right when they were starting to form. I think we didn't.
I don't even know if they even have sports teams nowadays. It's such a small school.
Yeah, I think it might have been a little bit after that. And you've also got Surrey Community College too.
Right,
So there's a lot of stuff to cover there.
Yes, there is.
Can you talk about the difference between working at the school paper and then working at a
Professional.
real world
Yeah.
professional newspaper?
Yeah.
That was like.
Well, one thing about the school paper, it was a once a week, so the deadlines weren't as strenuous as a daily. The Mount Airy News was a daily paper.
Okay.
What I started at. So basically, what that means is if I go cover a basketball game at 7 o'clock, I got to get back to the office as soon as it's over, write it up, have it done by 11, have my pictures developed, all of that. To beat the deadline.
It's quick.
It's quick. There's not as much pressure
Right.
on a weekly.
Right.
you've just got one deadline a week, but
Got more time.
you have more time, but at the same time, you still want to try to push as much as you can out. Like the basketball game I just put out from last night. We're still trying to get them. We try to operate our website like a daily, even though our publication is a weekly.
Right,
Yeah.
that makes sense. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, was the work and personal life balance that first year pretty lopsided towards the work?
You talking about professionally?
Yeah.
Well, what I ended up finding, was it was such a different schedule. It was really a second shift schedule because it was coming in at 4 o'clock.
Okay.
Because sports
It's after school.
is after school.
Right.
Yeah. So there's really, if you're for a daily, there's no need to be there early in the day unless something special is going on. Unless there's a signing or something.
Sure. Yeah.
Some athletes are signing. There's a ceremony during the day, but most of your work for a daily in sports happens at night.
Right.
Yeah. But what I find is you get off at 12 o'clock, then you unwind for a couple hours. Next thing you know, it's 2 or 3 in the morning. Then you wake up and it's maybe 10 or 11 the next day. It was just adjusting to a new lifestyle. Right. You know what I'm saying?
I guess it would help if you're a night owl. Do you consider yourself to be?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I always have been, yeah.
Me too.
Yeah.
It can be challenging to get up. Like when school goes back in session, when I have to start getting up at 6, it's gonna be challenging.
Yes. Oh, you guys didn't ask me this, but this here's an example of that. Working that schedule. I'd been there for, I think it was my 3rd year. And Thomas Lester was actually the editor here for a while. Okay. And I worked with him at Mount Airy News too. We were college fraternity brothers.
Okay.
And when I got moved to sports editor in Mount Airy, I hired him to come help me. And we actually had an apartment there those first couple of years.
Yeah.
I mean, we were working the same schedules. We knew each other, so we had an apartment we shared. And we had both worked the night before. And he wakes me up the next morning at like 8:30. Get up, man. Get up. We've got to get into the office. What are you talking about? Get up. What had happened was the planes had just hit the Twin Towers. Yeah. And that was the craziest thing. I mean, he woke me up at like 8:30 telling me this is happening. Right. I'm still, maybe about 5 hours of sleep in thinking, this is a dream. What are you talking about? Yeah. It was so surreal, And he got me up just in time to see that second one hit. And he was like, man, we got to go. We got to get to the office right now. Mm-hmm. And so we did. And, the whole staff just started working up that day. And it was just, the way to put it is just surreal. It didn't seem real.
I'm sure that story dominated that paper that day, didn't it?
Oh, gosh. I mean, yes, they put out a special edition that day. It was like what you hear about, like war-type headlines. Mm-hmm. The big, bold, about this big decks. That's what it was like, yeah.
Did you have people come by the office asking for information before it was published, or did people just generally not do that?
I didn't. I'm sure there were. Mm-hmm. I was kind of at a lower level at that point, being a sports guy, so that kind of left me alone as far as with the public. Just kind of, hey, go and gather info. But
so, just to give a bit of background for listeners who aren't that aware, and I'm not totally informed myself, what is the structure like for a newspaper company or organization? You have editors, writers, managers. Mm-hmm. How does that all work together?
Well, let me try to answer that by talking about where we were when I first started here and where we are now. Right. When I very first started here, it was 2004. That was when we were in Dr. Nestor's office. It was a lot bigger office. We had, I think it was 8, a staff of 8 at that time. I was the sports editor when I first came to Carroll. All I did was sports. Dee Lindsay was the editor. Okay. She actually ended up leaving and taking a job in the school system. You guys may have heard her name.
Sure.
It's been a few years. She passed away last year, and I think her last couple years she switched and taught at Pulaski County.
Okay, I see.
But she was the editor. I was the sports editor. We had another lady who her job was basically composition. She put the pages together.
Right, okay.
She paginated the pages. Fred Gerald he designed all our own graphics. We had a front office receptionist. We had a general manager who he oversaw everything.
Right.
Couple of ad people.
Yeah.
Most of it was handled in-house, but the only thing we didn't do was print the paper. It was printed at the Mount Airy News.
Okay.
Mount Airy would take, once they were finished with the product, would bring it to us on Tuesdays, and we had a special room there in Dr. Nestor's office where we would take the papers, bundle them, label them. I mean, we did all of that.
Wow.
Now, fast forward 20 years, there's myself and Dave Brolls. We have 2 writers. We answer the phones.
Yeah.
When customers come in, we take care of them too. What's ended up happening is our company has, we've been sold 2 or 3 times over the years, and we've been bought by, the company owns us now owns over 100 newspapers.
It's based in Tennessee, right?
It's yeah, Adams Publication Group.
Right.
And so what happens is they own all these papers, so they consolidate a lot of these services. So like our pages used to be put together here, and when I say that, I mean actually laid out the designs of the pages.
Yeah.
That doesn't happen anymore. Now it's we have a team of paginators,
Okay.
and so what I do is like on Mondays on my deadline day, I make a budget. I say, okay, here's what we need on the front page. Here's what goes inside, and then sort of put it together, send it back to us to proof.
Right.
All of our circulation is taken care of at the Mount Airy News now.
Okay.
They take care of all of our delivery. They take care of the bundling, all that stuff we used to have to do on Tuesday. So we still are able to do all the same things. It's just a lot of it is done
Outsourced, kind of.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's not all done right here.
You mentioned ads. How do you handle personally finding people to, I guess, sponsor, is that the correct term, or advertise in your papers, or is that handled by Adams Publishing? How does that work?
It's we have ad reps who
Okay.
do that. That's their job, is just to meet with the clients and to sell our ads, that sort of thing. Yeah.
Do they usually get like priority on a page, or are there tiers to it? Because that's something we're kind of exploring, maybe finding a sponsor or two, and I'm not really sure how that works in terms of course it's different for an audio format, right?
Right.
But I wasn't sure how you did it. Or...
Well, there's certain rates for certain things.
Right.
Ad prices are different depending on if it's black and white or if it's color, obviously. That's a small, what we call like a 1x3 ad, which basically means 1 column by 3 inches.
Okay. Yeah.
That's going to be fairly cheap, you know. You probably get that at a reasonable price. Now, you get a full page ad, though, you're looking at hundreds of dollars.
Right.
If you or a double truck ad. But now people, for some of our advertisers who are frequent advertisers, we work, specials and that sort of thing.
Right.
But that's all totally out of my bailiwick. We always say editorial and advertising are totally separate.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah, they're totally separate departments.
You mentioned that you had 8 staff working here in the past. You have 2 now. Does that affect the amount of information that you're able to put out to the people?
Unfortunately, it does. Yeah, it does. So it's like, if we had more staff, I wouldn't be here during the day as much. I would spend more time in the evenings covering more sports and things. But somebody's got to be in here and with customers for breaking news. You've got to rely on the community to help, like with sports. Jerry Carter, I don't know if you guys are familiar with him, but he's he does a blog.
Yeah, the
Okay,
Around the
Carroll
Valley.
County Sports Report.
Yeah.
He
Okay.
really does a good job of
Yeah.
coverage of sports.
Yeah, he's at
He
everything.
came a lot to
He
cross
really
country.
is. He
Yeah.
gets everywhere, even if it's 5 hours away.
Yeah.
I think we were in Bristol.
Yeah, he
for
came
our
to
last
the one in
regional cross
Bristol.
country meet.
He's amazing. He's
He was-
amazing. But he's been great.
Mm-hmm.
He helps send me stuff, and that helps with some of the time constraints, that sort of thing.
Didn't he help with the book for the girls?
It's actually his book.
Yeah.
Have you guys seen it?
Mm-mm.
I've seen it on Facebook, but I haven't seen it in
I've seen
person,
actual
really.
copy.
Let me grab a copy. It's a really nice book. But yeah, take a look at that.
Oh, yeah.
He did all that. Chris Richardson helped him a lot, which is Ashton and
Yeah, Ethan.
Ethan's dad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm sure that's really cool for the families too and the players.
Oh yeah. Well, you think about that. That's something
They're-
that'll you'll have for the rest of your life. Their grandkids will be able to
Right.
look at that and have that as a. As
What
a
got him
memory.
interested in local sports?
Jerry is just a huge sports fanatic. The story he told me when he was in high school, he said he was a great outside shooter. He said, think of like Steph Curry. He said he could just, he could just light it up. He said he scored like 40 some points in a game, like in the 8th grade.
Wow.
Was coming home. I guess he lived close and was on a skateboard, and a drunk driver hit him. Kind of wiped out any shot of him playing. So I think this is kind of a way for him to stay involved in
Right.
sports, and it's something he's passionate about. I mean, right now, he's on a 3-week trip, basically around the United States. He's trying to complete a loop of every college football ball game.
Wow.
Now, not just this year. He's not. I don't mean he's going to every single ball game this year. There's a handful that he's not been to already, and he's finishing that loop out this year.
That's impressive.
So he's like out on the West Coast somewhere now.
Wow.
So he was at the Holiday Bowl last night, Louisville and USC.
Interesting.
Yeah, I live vicariously through Jerry.
Yeah, he seems to really enjoy what he does, and
He does.
he's really
They were
involved.
taking pictures of us, and I don't know what he looks like, so I can't
He's-
spot him in the crowd.
He's got the jersey on.
But on his
He's
web,
always got a hockey jersey.
Yeah.
That's it. Yeah.
Yeah.
but, on his blog, there's pictures of us standing there. I don't even know when he took them.
Yeah.
So it's kind of hard to look good when you don't. So we really appreciate it. And he did some good stuff there for us.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
Did he grow up around here, or?
No. Let's see. His connection is. One of his parents, I think, grew up around Bugs Island Lake, which is like around South Hill, Virginia.
Okay.
It's way if you go out on 58 past Martinsville,
Okay.
Danville, and keep going. It's basically at the end of that road. And then one of his other parents kind of lived somewhere on the other end of 58, I think, and Carroll's kind of in the middle.
In the
And
middle.
he was like, this would be a great place to
Right.
settle down.
Sure. Okay. That's it.
did you ever consider writing a book?
Have I ever considered writing a book? I've had people ask me about it. I've thought about it. But the amount of time it takes,
Right.
Yeah.
I don't know when I would ever be able to do it. I would have to have time off from my regular job.
Right.
So maybe one day.
Maybe one day.
Maybe one
Do you
day.
think that it would be sports related?
It would absolutely be
That's
sports,
sweet.
or at least mostly. It might be something on Carroll County in general, but it would have a lot to do with athletics. If I were to ever do that, yeah.
When most people are interested in the newspaper or writing or reading, they also have an interest in history. Have you always had an interest in history as well?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Do you have a specific time period that you're interested in?
I like WW2. I mean,
Yeah.
so I consider that they're called the greatest generation, but
Yeah.
I mean, you think of what they did.
Yeah.
Liberate us from Nazi Germany.
Right.
World domination. Yeah.
In one generation, went from the Great Depression to the biggest superpower ever. So
Yeah.
It's impressive.
It's really is impressive.
Yeah.
So you were at the Mount Airy newspaper for
Yes.
1 year before you became editor. Can you talk a little bit about the duties of an editor and how that differs from just a writer?
Yeah. So if Well, when I first started as a sports writer, I basically did whatever Michael Hyatt told me to.
Yeah.
Go cover this game, go cover that. But now once you're that man in charge, then and we'll take Surrey County for instance. One thing I like about Carroll is I can be a homer. I can kind of take the home team side in my story sometimes. Couldn't do that when you've got 4 schools to cover and they're playing each other and there's rivalries. You just can't do that. So yes, so at that point, then you have to take into account, okay, what games do I have today? Which ones are the most important? Sometimes you can just have to look at it like, well, which ones have we not covered as much? There's a lot more decision making that goes into it as opposed to just being an assignment.
Being there.
Right. Yeah, you're all of a sudden the man in charge, and now you have to pick out what's the biggest stories, what's worthy of being covered, what maybe do we have to knock for this time.
Sure.
Did you feel ready to take on that role?
I really wasn't. It was more of a trial by fire, but I had no choice. So
Best way to learn.
Sink or swim. Yeah.
You said you were at the Mountaineer News for around 5, 6, 7 years?
It was 5. I started in '99 and I moved to Carroll in 04.
Okay, I see.
Yeah.
What motivated you to leave the Mountaineer News and come here to the Carroll News?
Well, what ended up happening, that was right around the time the Carroll News was purchased by the same company that owned the Mountaineer News.
Okay.
That was about the time that transition happened. And at that time, the sports editor here at the Carroll News, his name was J.R. Schrader. He had just retired. I think he was up in his late 60s, and it was time for him to retire, and they needed a new sports person. And the publisher at that time of all those would have been both papers. Said, Alan, there's an opening in Hillsville for sports editor. Would you rather do that than here? And I was back living here then, and it was an easy decision.
Makes sense.
Yeah, I would much rather be here than Surrey County. This is home. I mean, it's just where I wanted my kids to be able to grow up. This is more where my wife was from. It was just an easy decision.
Did you do sports exclusively for that initial period?
For about 2 years.
2 years.
And then once Dee Lindsay left to take a job with the school system, once again, it was...
Trial by fire.
It's yours. Have fun, yeah. So I just got thrown into the news business that way.
Yeah. Did you feel
The
like
news end of it.
Did you feel like that you could write better stories only having one school to cover, and really delve into it more than having 5 schools to cover?
It just depends. It just depends.
You certainly have more variety with 5 schools.
You have more variety, yeah.
But it may be harder to really go deep, maybe in one team.
I enjoy being here. I enjoy Carroll County. I love Carroll County. I wish I had more time to be able to cover more of the sports, but like I said, some of those time constraints since the pandemic have made it harder.
Yeah. Being a sports writer, how do you build that rapport with the coaches and the players as well?
Well, the coaches, usually you start with the coaches. That's going to be your first point of contact.
Yeah.
You just try to start off introducing yourself, just being who you are, and saying, this is who I am and what I'm doing. We're going to be working together. I want to cover your team.
Yeah.
We want to make sure you guys get the best coverage you can. It just grows from there. You just try to build a rapport. I've been lucky that most of the coaches here have been great to work with.
Yeah.
Even if I have something stupid or maybe print something they don't like, we're blessed, I think, at Carroll to have really good people and coaches.
I think it helps to be such a small community, too. Everyone kind of knows each other, and that could help.
It does help a lot, yeah.
Especially just being one school, too. One coach could ask another coach, hey, is this something I want to pursue, right? It can be helpful.
So, being a small town like Carroll, it must be interesting to kind of write the story of a small town in that newspaper, because you see all the events that happen, and you're able to consolidate that and put out the kind of a view of that area. Can you talk about some of the more interesting stories you've covered in Carroll County over the years? I think you mentioned one earlier.
I tell you what, one of the coolest things that I ever had happen, it's probably been about 20 years ago. I started here in '04, and I hadn't been here that long. And it come across a scanner about a prison break from up here at the courthouse. And this guy, he got loose, was on the run for about 2 to 3 hours, and I heard it come across, escaped prisoner, think he's in the direction of the middle school. So, and at the time our office was where Dr. Nestor's dental office is now. That used to be our office at that time. Well, I hopped in my car and thought, okay, let me grab my camera, I'll just kind of go and assess the situation. I drove around the block about 2 or 3 times, and I got, literally, you can see it right here, the Christian church, right there. The guy had got, if I kind of visualize for you. You see kind of where this white fencing is? Yeah. Right there on the sort of the middle of the, well, that person was just walking. There's an AC unit kind of back behind that, a huge AC unit. And he was just crawling back behind it, was just kind of waiting for everybody to, for the heat to die down, I guess.
It worked for a few hours.
Well, I just happened to pull up right when the police had gotten there and found him. Had guns drawn on him, the canine dog out. I pulled my camera out and I just started shooting. I hear Steve Williams, he was the chief of police at the time, started, press! Press! Which basically means, don't do anything that's going to get us in trouble. But actually, I ended up winning some awards for that. Just kind of a Johnny on the spot. It was just luck of the draw, it was just... That was one of the most interesting. One of the other ones, I can't remember the year. I want to say it was 2013. What I do remember, it was Easter. It was Easter Sunday. And my wife and I had gone to church, or the family and I had gone to church. We'd gone to Skyview there in Fancy Gap. And as soon as we service was over, we went down the mountain to Mount Airy to my wife's family for Easter lunch. It was a really foggy ride. It was bad. I mean, it was some of the worst fog I'd ever seen. Got down to Mount Airy, literally got my plate and had just sat down to eat. And my phone just started blowing up. Everybody started texting me, calling me. It was a 95 car pileup on Interstate 77. And so I got up. I think I took one bite, one sip of water, got my stuff and went. And once I got on scene there, I never will forget, sheriff at that time was J.B. Gardner, and he was just kind of waving me. He gave me access to the interstate, even though it was totally shut down. The only thing moving was wreckers going back and forth. Yeah. I've never seen anything like it. I mean, it looked like a war zone. It looked like bombs had gone off.
It must have been scary. It
was extremely scary. I mean, I talked to people. There was an elderly couple there that were traveling from Canada. Wow. And the way they described it to me, the pileup had already started, but with the fog, it's like a chain reaction. Yeah. And they were kind of right in the middle. They didn't get hurt. They didn't get hit too bad, but they got out of their car and they could just see and hear tractor trailers coming right at them. Mm-hmm. And the only thing they could do was run across the other side of the interstate, and they just barely made it. I mean,
I heard that some people ran up the runaway truck ramps to avoid.
Yeah, it was, I mean, again, I've never seen anything like that. I had another thing that was crazy about it. you know, we did coverage all that day. It was kind of like what I was talking about with the Twin Towers. That was my day.
Right.
The rest of the day was putting pictures out, getting coverage. Next day, I had Good Morning America called me, wanting to use their stuff. All these like NBC, ABC affiliates all over Virginia, up and down the East Coast. Hey, can we use your pictures? But that was one of those you don't really want to be on because it's just so much carnage and damage, and like I said, it just looked like a war zone. I just wouldn't wish that on anybody.
When a lot of people think of the news, they think of positive things, but it can also be very negative things like that.
Yeah.
How do you balance showing both the positive side and the negative side?
Well, you just try to do the best you can. I mean, when things like that happen, I mean, you have to cover them.
Yeah.
You have to cover them. We do our best. David is really good. David Broles, my staff writer, he's really good with sort of what we call the human interest pieces,
Sure.
feature pieces, the more positive type pieces. So I let him do a lot of that to try to balance. I mean, you try to balance it out, but you can't always. I mean,
It's hard.
news is what it is, you know.
The Carroll News is a print newspaper. It also has a digital piece.
Yeah.
It does.
How has the internet and social media played a role in that local newspaper?
Well, that's a big part of what I was talking about earlier about, you know, as far as our print, we're once a week, but we try to make our website like a daily newspaper.
Yeah.
I do have a Twitter handle that I'll use for a lot of sports coverage, for especially basketball and football. Just scores in this quarter. I mean, just try to keep people
Informed.
up to date if they want to be. That's one way we do. We try to use our Facebook page quite a bit just to push stories out. Just, hey, here's what we're working on today. Check us out on our website. Now, with that being said, our company has just, in the last month, for the first time, put a paywall. You
Yes.
may have noticed
I did notice.
on our website, and so that counteracts that a little bit.
Yeah.
I think you get three free reads before it starts prompting you to have to pay, and I don't like that. I don't like a paywall, but that's not my decision. So.
Something I did figure out, if you open up a private tab and you put the link in, it'll reset the counting. So that's just...
Tell me that.
Yeah. It's just something I figured out. So Luke and I both noticed that the website had a redesign.
Yeah.
Was that, I guess it was done externally by Adams Publishing. Was the motivation behind that just updating it, making it look more modern? Was that it, or?
We used to use this is called GPS.
Okay.
And all it is a system like, right here I'm working on a story about Sports Hall of Fame.
Okay.
This is where I write my story.
Yeah.
You've got element tabs here where you can download pictures to.
Sure.
Just push them to the website.
Sure.
This thing got about 7 steps from once you start to write the article until you're done or you push it to the website. The same time all this changes started happening with the website, our company switched. They switched from this GPS to a system called Blocks.
Blocks. Okay.
BLOX. And the reason we did that is because most of the other papers in the company already use that. They're just trying to streamline it.
Yeah.
Sure.
But it took about 7 steps, David Broles went through and counted it out to 40 steps. It's a time killer for no reason at all. I don't know why they did that. But this thing is connected to our website now.
Okay.
So whenever they went to Blocks is when our website changed. It must be interconnected. But they don't even tell us that. Hey guys, here's a new website. Have fun figuring it out.
Yeah. For the podcast, we use something called WordPress. You may have heard of it.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And I can just type it up, upload the audio file and publish it, and it'll have the text, so like the podcast description, and then it'll have the file, and that will automatically be aggregated by like Spotify or Apple Podcasts so people can listen to it. And what's neat is the post description will kind of be implanted into the Apple Podcast or Spotify description, so that I don't have to copy it and put it in multiple places. I just change it in one and it goes out to everywhere.
Okay.
So
That's great.
I was just kind of curious how it worked with comparison to like blocks or GPS, because the logistical stuff is what interests me, because I handle a majority of it for the podcast.
Yeah.
And I'm curious to see how other publishing groups do it, really.
We mentioned negative stories, positive stories, but then breaking news.
Right.
How did you cover, and how did the Carroll News cover COVID when it first came out? Because I'm sure I read at the time, but it's been 3 or 4 years.
Oh gosh, when COVID first hit, that was just literally all we had in there for the first 2 to 3 months. How it affected schools,
Right.
how it was affecting our local businesses. We used the CDC numbers. We compared how Carroll was doing compared to the rest of the state. You know, we were really high.
Yeah.
Our COVID numbers, when you broke it down like on population per capita, we were higher than anybody in the state there for a long time. I think we were number 2 behind Lee County for a while.
Wow.
And a lot of that I think was because people didn't want to wear their masks. I don't want to get political with that, but
Yeah.
It
I mean
shouldn't be
we
political.
did have a lot higher rate here.
Sure.
But it did open up a lot of stories for us to cover. Didn't want to be writing about COVID all the time, but I mean that's all anybody was talking about for months there. I mean, you remember what it was?
Yeah.
Everything shut
And
down.
then when school shut down on that Friday, everyone just went crazy.
You kind of see it coming, though, really. They
Yeah.
were talking about it late December, early January. A lot of people weren't picking up on it. Were y'all looking at it at that point, paying attention to it?
I'll be honest, we were. David was more on it than I was. It worried him to death, and he kept updating me on it. And I finally got to the point where I saw, like you, this is coming our way. This is going to be bad.
Yeah.
It's like in late January, a lot of people started to pick up on it, but then the whole month of February, people were just didn't really pay much attention to it. And it seemed like once the NBA shut down, I think it was March 12th, that next day all the schools shut down. And it's like all of a sudden it went from nobody was really paying much attention to it to that next week,
Yeah.
the whole world changed.
What you just said right there, that right there is when I knew, oh man, we're dealing with something different. Because I've never seen sports leagues
Right.
No.
just shut down.
And we went to Walmart that night, and everybody was at Walmart. It took
Yeah.
us 4 hours to get to the store.
Yeah.
So there was a cultural shift that night that took place, and the next day everything was different.
Yeah.
But
Really interesting to see how people's behavior changes in the event of something like that. My dad will often joke that it takes 48 hours for society to collapse. I think 24 hours is probably a more accurate number, because
I mean, we got to look into it during that time.
Yeah.
I mean, it was scary.
when people were like stealing like toilet paper out of all things from other people's
Yeah.
shopping
I think
carts.
somebody killed somebody in a Costco. They smashed a wine bottle and stabbed them
Wow.
over toilet paper. I mean,
Yeah.
some of y'all covering from like one of the first few people that got it in Carroll all the way to the end, which is
Yeah.
pretty neat to see.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that brings up an interesting question for me. How do you balance like privacy when it comes to stuff like that? Because that can be sensitive information. Maybe sometimes people don't want certain things published. How do you get the news out, get the story out, but not embarrass people?
So that one case in particular, normally, there are HIPAA laws
Right.
and things like that you have to be very careful about. The reason we were able to be specific with that, it actually came, the whole way we got that, it came from a press release it was a release that the school system made
Oh, okay.
on their own media like Facebook, alerting people. We've had a case of COVID. This is where the person's been. And so the way we looked at that was the school system was putting it out, so it was no longer kind of a HIPAA
Sensitive,
type.
yeah. Okay.
So and we didn't release a name or anything, So one thing, and you've not asked me this, but one thing I feel is important about being a journalist is being objective. Is being able to, no matter what's going on, take yourself out of it. It's hard to do sometimes. I'll tell you, this is the greatest example of that I've ever had to do. When I was talking to you guys earlier about having a staff of 8, the lady who did our pagination, who put our pages together, I come to work one morning, everybody's crying. The sheriff was in there, which was Sheriff Manning at that time. And he broke the news to us that her husband, they were estranged, they were separated, but he shot and killed her the night before. So here's this person that I've worked with for 2 years, become friends with, become close with. Now I have to go cover the murder trial. And the only thing I want to do when I'm sitting there is jump over the bench and choke that guy, because I know what he did. But I couldn't do that. I had to sit there and I had to write it up just as down the middle and fair and balanced as I could, with this is what his defense is saying happened. Here's what the prosecution's saying. And you can't inject any of your own personal feelings into it. That's hard to do. Yeah. Especially something like that. But
so close.
You have to be professional. You have to. Yeah. It about killed me.
Yeah. Sure.
But I did that. And that's the best example I can think of keeping yourself out of it. But you have to be fair and balanced and to be in the media. And unfortunately, and I know some people will say we're not always fair and balanced. We take a side on something. We don't try to. Right. We try to present it as down the middle as we can.
That's how we try to do it, but of course, we're human. Things happen, but...
Well, I was going to say is, unfortunately, you don't see that as much as you used to, especially in the national media. Right. Yeah. And that's where media gets a bad name, for the most part, I think.
I did notice this past election, when you were covering both the clerk's race, both Phil Hawks and Carroll Goad, you released the articles on the same day.
Yes.
And I believe that was intentional, probably. And I kind of wondered if we should have done something like that, because we did interviews with both Carroll Goad and Phil Hawks, but we released them kind of spread out. So
I think one of our Gerald Goad, we did 2 with Gerald.
Yeah.
And we did 1 back in the spring to kind of cover the office.
Yeah.
And then we did another one to cover the election in the fall.
And we did Mr. Hawks's earlier, maybe I want to say around October, and then we did Gerald's or Mr. Goad's right before the election, like a week before.
Yeah.
So part of me kind of feels guilty about that, because it made look that we were impartial.
It's just scheduling.
It's just how it works, you know.
Yeah.
And
what we were taught, if you go on to pursue this in college, one thing that you will be taught on that, equal and balanced time, fair and balanced time. And so basically, if you give 30 minutes to Mr. Hawks, you need to give 30 minutes to Mr. Goad. If you give him one, as long as it's
balanced and equal, equitable.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's all you can do. I mean, that's what we strive to do. That's the most fair way to do it. And even and to expound on that, in political races, because I don't want to ever be seen as I'm, or the paper is slanted one way versus the other. We'll give the candidates the exact same questions and say, here's the questions you're getting, the other candidate's getting 2. You've got 1,000 words.
Right. Have at it.
Yeah. And it might be 2 or 3 questions, but we try to make everything as equal as you possibly can, and that's a good way to handle that.
Yeah. How do you handle coming up with questions beforehand? Because that's something Luke and I have kind of battled with. Sometimes we'll come into an interview with questions prepared, and then sometimes we just kind of do it off the cuff.
But it tends to work better having a conversation.
Right.
Kind of seeing what that person is interested in.
Yeah.
And creating questions in the moment off of that. Just rolling with the conversation. It works much more naturally that way.
That's a lot what I do. Sometimes, and especially, if it's in sports, I'm usually okay. But sometimes I'll go out on a news assignment where they're recycling styrofoam, and
Right.
I don't know anything about that. So David will sometimes, he'll just go in and he'll be like, treat me like I'm a 5-year-old. What can you tell me about recycling styrofoam?
Right.
Sometimes that's all you can do. If I have a big interview coming up with a big subject, maybe I'm unfamiliar about, I'll try to look up as much information
Yeah.
as I can on them, which will lead to a few questions. But I generally find, just like you said, Luke, just to get a conversation going, a few questions to get loosened up, and then just kind of go from there. And a lot of times, it just leads into one another. You know, you ask a question, you get a conversation going, and it just naturally leads into it. I mean, that's pretty much what I'm going to do with you guys.
We found a few softball questions. Kind of work, where are you from? And that kind of opens up them
Yeah.
talking about their childhood and where they grew up, and then they're much more open later on. A few other interviews, I think with Congressman Griffith, his office wanted questions beforehand.
Right.
Yeah.
Too. So
That was
especially
challenging.
with a person who has that job, you don't want, a gotcha question to come up and then they're surprised on camera. So they asked for those questions in advance.
Yeah.
So it was more scripted and it was less natural, but we liked the interview.
Mm-hmm.
If at all possible, we like to have a genuine conversation with somebody.
Yeah.
It just works better.
And
It really does.
we found that to be the case with military recruiters too. When we started the podcast, and you might want to use this later in your piece, but we wanted to cover veterans.
Yeah.
So like older generations, maybe Korea and World War II, ask them their stories.
They're hard to find.
They're hard to find,
Really
and
hard to find.
we haven't had much success with that. But I kind of thought about, well, hey, we have people serving active duty right now. They have stories to tell as well. And some of the most successful ones are military recruiters because it's their job to put themselves out there. So I reached out to some of them, and a lot of their offices would require questions beforehand because of, they're there to represent the United States. But I just found that kind of limiting. And I understand why, of course, but I don't know have you ever had an interviewee who you've had to really stick to a script with? And how'd you handle it?
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, all the time. I mean,
Well, sure.
things like, I'm just trying to think, just even here recently when these plants, magnolia plants,
Okay,
shut
they
down,
closed,
like
yeah.
3 of them. They shut down tighter than Fort Knox trying to get any information out of them. I called their PR people, their HR people, their president. I left a message with everybody. Nobody would answer me. Sometimes what you're going about, sticking to a script or trying to. Some people, I've seen journalists who will try to ask. They'll ask a question, and the person will say, "Well, no comment, or I can't talk about that." And they'll try to ask the question again, but like in a different way. And they'll do that like 5 times.
Yeah. That doesn't work.
You're just beating your head against the wall. For the most part.
That's true.
I was going to ask you a little bit about that. Being a part of the press in a small town like Carroll, I'm sure in a bigger area, it's much less personal. I'm sure some of the people you write stories about,
Yeah.
How do you write the stories and provide the factual information, even if it's tough, with people you know about? When it says Alan Worrell wrote that article, is that tough to do? I'm sure it is in an area like Carroll County.
Well, it is, and you're going to ruffle feathers at times.
Right.
That's another thing. I mean, if anybody ever goes into this business, you better have a thick skin because you're going to catch flack. And some people are equipped to deal with it, some people aren't. That's just part of it. But I mean, any job is good. You gotta. I mean, if you're a police officer, it's the same thing. Fire department. I mean, a teacher goes through a lot of that kind of stuff too. I mean, it's just part of the job. You gotta man up and have a tough skin.
Just
To kind of go into the small town newspapers, you hear a lot about that. In the news, from bigger outlets. Where do you see the future of the small town newspaper going in the next 10 years? You see it more online, or you still see it in print?
I think print will stay around for a while, especially for the smaller papers. The biggest part of our subscriber base is elderly or older folks that like to have
Physical, yeah.
Physical copy of the hand in the paper. They like the way it feels.
Yeah.
They've always done it. They like to read it, and we're always going to be here for those people. But at a certain time, I do see a day down the road where we'll probably be all digital.
Yeah.
It is what it is, but that's the future. I mean, there's no doubt about it. I mean,
Yeah.
the younger generation they don't read a newspaper like we did. They like everything on a screen or a tablet for the most part. It seems like.
Yeah. I read the New York Times almost every day, but I don't get the huge, ream of paper coming in every morning in the mail.
Yeah. You
I-
just have like an
Yeah,
online
just-
subscription.
And I've picked up the Times before, like in the stores and things, and it's interesting to read it. But we were talking. Who did we talk to? Is it Walter Rugaber?
Probably.
He said one of his challenges was to sit down and read the whole New York Times in one day.
Oh, yeah.
And he said it can't be done. He said nobody ever sits down and reads the whole thing in one day.
Yeah.
It's a lot.
Well, and Dave Broyles makes a joke, our best work ends up as somebody's birdcage liner, So that's another thing. You got to have a thick skin about it.
Yeah. How do you find working between multiple writers and editors works out? Because do you find that people like step on each other's toes? Like maybe you want to cover a story, but David wants to cover it instead, or maybe you don't want to cover something and he doesn't want to, but you just kind of have to. How does that work?
Well, for us, it works great since there's just two of us. I mean, we basically can prioritize. David, I'm going to be covering this and this week. What do you have? Because a lot of times he'll have school board meeting he's got to cover, or Hillsville Town Council. That's where his evening works comes in. So we all have our own set things. He doesn't do sports, so I take care of that. It generally works itself out. A lot of times with the human interest things, people come to him with those ideas. Okay. And he just runs with them. And I'll just let him do that. I tend to handle more of the harder, what they call hard news. Mm-hmm. Hard news is more like breaking news or, government news, things that's happening now, like as we go. Quick. The feature things are not as timely.
Sure.
Yeah. So Dave fills in a lot with that, which brings the balance that you talked about a lot of times between the some of the negative, the darker crime type things.
There's I'm sure you receive information too before really a lot of other people do, or maybe you hear things. There's stuff in the news right now that's pretty big news going on in the county area. When does you and the Carroll News decide that you have enough information to release that big cover story? Or do you wait for the local authorities to release information? How do you kind of get a good feel on when to come out with a story? If you already know information.
Honestly, a lot of it is just you sort of get a sense of timing. I've been doing it for 25 years now. Yeah. One thing, I tell people this sometimes. It's just I may be I'm not trying to swipe your question, but I've been doing it so long. It's like things tend to go in cycles sometimes, and you can almost see things coming down the pike sometimes before they even get here. You start to develop a sense of it. Sometimes we get hit with breaking news, like from the sheriff's office. It just comes out of nowhere. You didn't know was coming your way. It was like a murder or something. You have no way to plan for that kind of thing. Sort of like, how do you know, I
guess when it would be appropriate to release something, if there hasn't been a statement.
All right, let me put it this way. Sometimes we know things ahead of time, but without actually getting a source to confirm it, you can't run with it, or you open yourself up to all kinds of libel, lawsuits. There's been a lot of times there's things I've heard happen, maybe in the school, maybe there's been a law broken, but until word comes out or an arrest has been made, I can't do anything.
Everybody hears stuff. I'm
right.
sure you hear stuff too.
Yes.
No, not everybody has the power to go out and write a front page story about it.
Right.
How do you kind of if you're talking with family or friends, hear rumors about stuff, do you put it out of your mind, or do you kind of look for that through proper channels?
No,
You hear stuff and then you pursue it?
Yeah. So there's a lot of times you'll hear rumors, and that's all it is.
Mm-hmm.
And you go and go to get confirmation, and the official or who the person is, I'm sorry, that's just not true.
Right.
You know, sometimes they are true, but you still can't go to press with them until you've got the official source. I mean, you know, if I've got the sheriff on record or the school superintendent, whoever is the appropriate source, if I go to press without confirmation it ain't true, I'm looking at a major lawsuit. You know what I'm talking about as far as libel or slander.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to be very careful with that.
Do you ever find those authorities or those officials come to you and ask you to hold off on a story for a while? Or does that happen?
I'd be naive not to say that it doesn't.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And you can't always do that. I mean, you know, sometimes. And I'll tell people, hey, it's nice to meet you.
Mm-hmm.
I look forward to working with you.
Mm-hmm.
I think we'll have a great working relationship, but you know, if you get busted doing something crazy, I'm gonna have to.
You're gonna have to put
it's
it
going in the paper, you know. Yeah.
And that kind of opens you up. You mentioned libel, but you also have freedom of the press. Can you talk about the importance of freedom of the press in the First Amendment?
Without it, I don't think we would be the country that we are. I mean, we go back to what we were just talking about earlier with history. You know, World War II. I mean, those are the guys that laid their lives down for us to do that.
Right.
And if we didn't have it, there's got to be watchdogs. I mean, government overreach, overrun. I mean, we've seen it a million times. There's got to be an accountability there, and that's why the First Amendment is so important. I think that's why newspapers are so important, and that's why we're kind of in a dangerous age now with newspapers going on the decline. I mean, there's going to be other media forms that pop up. I mean, podcasts
Right.
like you guys. I mean, the traditional media too. But I mean, without otherwise we're Russia, man, and we don't know who to trust.
Yeah.
You know?
It's hard.
I think the Washington Post, their slogan is "Democracy dies in darkness."
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I don't want to bring up other interviews, but that Walter, Mr. Rugover that we interviewed, he was working for the New York Times, and he covered. I think was he with the Times when he covered Watergate?
Yeah, he covered Watergate.
He worked against was it Bernstein.
Bernstein.
Yeah. Woodward. Yeah.
And Bob Woodward. So his perspective on that was pretty neat too, covering. You know, I think he worked down in Florida getting the bank accounts
Yeah,
statements.
he convinced Florida's general attorney to subpoena the records from the bank account,
Yeah.
and he was the reason that the case initially got going.
Yeah.
Just saying what you said right there. You know, most people don't. You read the First Amendment, freedom of the press too. Most people don't have that perspective.
Yeah.
I think you do. So
Well, and that's another thing too that makes it really tough when they talk about the hour limitation and our staff limitation. There's 2 people now.
yeah.
People ask us, why don't you do investigative type stories?
It's hard.
We used to do, when we had staff of 8, we could do that. It takes a lot of time
Yeah.
to put into an investigative story. I mean, sometimes you might be working 2-3 weeks just on one piece. And the reality is, in a newsroom like this,
Can't happen.
there's just not the time to do that. And then, when you're working with limited amounts of time, you have to worry about your accuracy being 100% too. So you've got to be really careful about that. But it's something I wish we could do more of, but we just are not able to now. I hope that makes sense.
It does.
It does.
Okay.
You talked about covering trials earlier too.
Yeah.
You have a staff of 2 now. What's the process like if a big trial happens? Having somebody in the courtroom every day to because some trials last all day and they last for weeks.
Oh yeah.
How do you have somebody, a warm body, in their courtroom, keeping track of what's going on, while also being able to put out, your everyday newspaper?
Once again.
Yeah, I mean, you just got to do it. I mean, I've had that. Like the one I was talking about, I hadn't been objective on. The guy wanted to jump the chambers.
Yeah.
That was like 3 days. That took up my whole week.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But we had a full staff at that time. If we do it now, I mean, I would go covered. I'd been there 2 or 3 days, and I'd have to tell Dave, you're in charge of everything for these 2 or 3 days. You're going to have to step up some. That's it. I mean, that's the reality we face now as a...
Do you coordinate with other newspapers, like with...
Gazette or...
Yeah, with the Gazette, because when I went to Cook Gogue's swearing-in ceremony last week, I saw you were there. I also saw that someone from the Gazette was there.
Yeah.
Do you work together with maybe Mount Airy News or the Gazette to cover stuff?
Right. Well, so Mount Airy News is a sister paper of ours.
Right.
We're owned by the same company, and the same deal with. There's a handful of other ones that write in that region. There's the Elkin Tribune, the Yadkin Ripple, and the Stokes News.
Okay.
And since we're sister papers, we can trade anything.
Right.
I can pull one of their stories without even asking.
Okay.
Because we're owned by the same company. It's the same property. Now, the Gazette and us are owned by different companies. So we don't, as reporters, as fellow reporters, we'll help each other out.
Sure.
But as far as they can't really take one of our stories and use it, and we can't really take one of theirs and use it, or without getting permission.
I find it hard to use the Gazette's website. It's behind a big paywall. I don't think you can read any of the articles without paying. Whereas, at least with the Carroll News, you can see the first paragraph after you've hit your limit.
Yeah.
And I think with the Gazette, they put the front page, an image of it. I also find myself trying to zoom in and read it, and it's too blurry. And I try every time, but I can't do it.
Yeah.
So, do you find that you have a natural competitor with them, or since you're separate enough geographically, you don't have to compete with them?
I think it's always going to be a little bit of a competitive thing.
Mm-hmm.
Not so much the employees.
Sure.
Because, the other reporters, we all get along well. I mean, Craig Worrell's one of my best friends, in the whole world. But as far as, we sell ads to the same people. So we're in direct competition.
Right.
To the employees, I don't look at it that way, but as a company, it kind of is competitive. Yeah.
Do you keep every newspaper that y'all print, or does the Carroll News keep every newspaper that's printed?
Yeah, like an archive.
Or how do y'all?
Yeah, let me. Well, I can show you after the interview, but we've got bound books out here. They starting. Well, I have them going back from 1965. Now the paper started in 1920. Okay. We have bound copies you can look at from 65 up until 2003.
Mm-hmm.
In 2003 was when we were bought out.
Right.
And at that time, the company decided not to do that anymore.
Mm.
So we just keep. We've got what we call a morgue. And there's 52 slots, and we'll keep a couple from each week.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
For every year.
Do you know if there's a copy of that original 1920 paper still out there?
I don't know if there is. Some of it is on microfilm. Like at the library, but the library, I think, did away with their units to use the microfilm. There's some websites I could give you guys the links to.
Okay.
That have gazettes and Carroll News is going back to the 30s and 40s.
Wow.
Yeah.
They're just harder to look at because the format there is page by page, and so you use a mouse to turn pages, and you have to zoom in digitally to look at it. It's harder to go through than a regular paper, but there are some out there. But I don't know. I've never seen a copy of the first 1920 edition of the Carroll News.
That'd be neat.
Yeah.
I guess with everything being digital now, it helps a little bit because you can look in the archives, right? But it's not the same.
Yeah.
As we're wrapping up, we have a few questions that Luke and I ask every interviewee, and I'll let Luke go first.
Yeah. What advice do you have for young people just making their way in the world? They're just trying to figure out what they want to do.
I tell you what, let's put it this way. I would say follow your heart and follow your dreams, but also know you don't have to leave here. If you work hard enough, you know what your goal is. You know, there are opportunities here, and we need young people here. We are an aging community, and I'd like to see more folks, aspiring professionals like you guys with bright futures, consider staying here. I know there's not as much to offer here as some of the bigger cities, but at the same time, the style of life here there's a lot to be said for it too. I mean, I think it's a lot calmer and laid back here, and I'd like to see more young folks be able to stay here and around. So I would encourage you to do that if you could. I hope that helps.
Well, thank you. And our next question is a bit of a doozy. We ask everyone that we interview this question.
But we find that it's really indicative of a person's true heart and who they are. And that is, what is the meaning of life to you?
Personally.
The meaning of life to me is not taking yourself too seriously, being able to have a good laugh, and enjoy your time here, because it's not long. How's that?
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Well, Mr. Alan Worrell, it's been an honor to speak with you today.
It's been an honor to be here, guys. Thank you so much.